Welcome to BizWire. I'm Joseph Nordstrom in Beijing. For decades, China has provided North Korea with the majority of its food, energy, and just as importantly, diplomatic cover, but in recent years has grown frustrated by the North's refusal to follow China's footsteps in reforming its economic system and its insistence on expanding its nuclear weapons program. Now, China does not want an unstable nuclear power on its doorstep, nor does it appreciate the flow of refugees over its northeastern border. The current Chinese regime, led by President Xi Jinping and Premier Li Keqiang, appear to be much more influenced by public opinion than their predecessors, and Chinese attitudes towards North Korea have devolved to the point where people frequently criticize official support for what they see as a much more repressive state than their own, a place that reminds many of China during the Cultural Revolution. Some see signs indicating that China is responding to U.S. pressure to help rein in their historical ally. The clearest example of Chinese influence on Pyongyang was the latest report by U.S. intelligence agencies indicating that 2 road-mobile Musadan intermediate-range ballistic missiles that had been readied for test launch on North Korea's east coast were recently removed. Officials said the mobile missiles, along with several other short-range missiles, were driven to storage facilities in an apparent victory for the international community. The Washington Times reported that what may have helped persuade Chinese minds was that U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry offered to cancel the planned deployment of 14 additional ground-based interceptors at U.S. missile defense bases in Alaska and California if China did more to stifle North Korean aggressiveness. China is imposing unprecedented trade and financial sanctions on North Korea, but it is unclear whether the net is tight enough to persuade Pyongyang to give up its nuclear weapons program. Last week, China's 4 largest state-controlled banks announced they are suspending business with North Korea's Foreign Trade Bank in accordance with guidance handed down by the China Banking Regulatory Commission, and as such is actually a policy of the Chinese government. In addition to the closed bank accounts, reports from South Korea say China has stepped up customs checks on goods destined for North Korea, which is seriously inhibiting trade and North Korea's ability to obtain hard currency. Beijing is increasingly saying no to Kim Jong-un's requests. A few months ago, North Korea withdrew their workers from the Kaesong Industrial Complex, a symbolic joint venture with South Korea. And what's interesting is that, according to government sources, North Korean authorities asked their Chinese counterparts to hire the 53,000 furloughed North Korean workers. It is believed that cash-strapped Pyongyang sought to maintain a valuable source of hard currency by switching partners to China, which, according to the source, declined the proposal and has pledged to comply with a new UN Security Council resolution to strengthen sanctions against North Korea, which was adopted following Pyongyang's 3rd nuclear test back in February. Shi Yin-hong, a professor and regional security expert at Renmin University, says China's policy towards North Korea is changing, but says that Beijing's ultimate goal is to seek a peaceful solution, not to force a collapse of the North Korean regime. Carrie Brown, a professor of Chinese politics and executive director of the China Studies Center at the University of Sydney, says China is fine with the status quo. Brown says the question Beijing faces is how to encourage and promote reform from within that is not regarded as threatening, and at the same time, how to create a strong enough sense of security in the regime that it sees a non-nuclear future as viable. Carrie Huang, an analyst at Hong Kong's South China Morning Post, wrote that it's obvious that North Koreans would face starvation, civil strife, and the possibility of a regime collapse if China cut off all economic support. But Huang says the overwhelming fear in Beijing is that such a collapse would mean millions of refugees flooding across the border. China's policymakers also fear that the end of the regime could herald a united Korea, leaving a powerful American ally on Beijing's doorstep. But analysts who have looked at the historical, ideological, economic, and diplomatic ties between Beijing and Pyongyang say that the signs are that the evolution in Beijing's long-term policy may be more complicated than some in the West understand. The relationship between China and Korea has a history deeper than the typical friendly state-to-state relationship. Well, that relationship, especially with the parts of the peninsula that now make up North Korea, goes back more than a millennium to the Han Dynasty. While most analysts see an evolution to the relationship taking place, they want to wait and see before judging how genuinely and seriously China has changed course, pointing to the fact that Beijing has previously appeared to respond to global pressure only to backtrack later. This is BizWire on the Blue Ocean Network. Stay tuned for more in Economic Insight.